Right, I'm going to be talking to you about an experience that we had in South Africa, and which I then explored further to find out what's going on here. About 2.5 years ago, I found out that there were several departments at our medical school where spontaneous telemedicine services had suddenly started. There was no planning, there was no business plan. People had just begun sending messages to each other, photos and messages. And so we looked at a whole batch of aspects about WhatsApp. There were over 1 billion individual users in the month of February. That's 1 in every 7 people in the world used it in February. It's free and it's easy to use. So I found some of the photos that the dermatologists had sent on their phones, and I've purposely shaded out only half of the person's face in the extreme right. Why? Because how many of you can tell me, how do you black out eyes if you've taken a photo on your phone and you've sent it via in fact, WhatsApp or Viber or FaceTime, etc.? It's not easy, so that's just something to bear in mind. So let's just take you over a simple case, a message from a doctor in an outlying hospital. And as you see, these messages average about 8 to 10 lines of text. The in fact, advantage of the photos is that they can be expanded. And so you can see the detail. And so the in fact, dermatologist gave the answer. And as you read through that, you see it was 2 o'clock in the morning and she was in Seattle instead of being in fact, Durban. They are answering these within about 1.5 minutes to 2 minutes. So I decided that it was best that we actually found out how this was going on in the world. So we did the standard, in fact, review. We searched 5 different databases, and our search strategy is outlined there. And all told, we found some 357 papers, of which, after having gone through the abstracts, we got that down to, in fact, 58. After having gone through the full-length papers, that came down to, in fact, 32. It's interesting that there are only 13 full-length papers. There are abstracts, there are letters, there are case reports. But interesting, in fact, where do these come from? The most come from India. So I thought, well, we had better investigate this a bit further here. But in fact, note also, Saudi, Turkey, Brazil, Philippines. In fact, UK is 5 because there was 1 paper that generated, in fact, three in fact, responses to that 1 paper. So in India, it's been, in fact, reported over a very wide spectrum of work, from orthopedics to in fact, diabetic eye screening, to, in fact, lab services. So it isn't just the surgeons, because the surgeons invariably are the first, because they have to have an instant answer. Surgeons just think that way, and it's excellent. There were 5 case reports, and it's just interesting to see the spectrum of these case reports. In the orthopedic case report, it was a patient who was taught to take photos of the external fixator pins so they could actually manage the, in fact, point of insertion in the skin. I won't go any further than that. So the interesting thing, however, is that there is very little telemedicine, doctor-to-doctor, single case, in fact, referral. Most of the papers refer to the use of WhatsApp as a group chat within a department. And if you think about it, you are sharing information about every patient that's in that department to all the members of the department. So the most junior doctor, if that intern asks a question, in the old days it would have gone up a hierarchy. Junior reg, senior reg, consultant, senior consultant. It's now shared among everybody, which is both a good thing and a bad thing, because it exposes those who, in fact, don't know their work. But you also get far more feedback, far more input on each patient. And so, as I say, it flattened the hierarchy. It certainly improved the in fact, communication. Handovers were far simpler because people actually knew about all the cases. They went faster. And there is the concern, however, that in some instances, the in fact, registrars who would have had to have managed the case themselves and gained the experience at 2 o'clock in the morning are now being given instructions. And they are not necessarily learning as, in fact, they work. So I, in fact, mentioned the in fact, pin-track sepsis, and I've put these two down because this is patient to doctor or family to doctor. In the second instance, there were 2 case reports of a daughter in constant contact with the palliative care doctor about the state of her one parent. In fact, the other case, it was in fact, niece was in contact on an almost daily basis at, in fact, one time. So it isn't just doctor to doctor or nurse to doctor. You can get the families doing this as well. So the dreaded word consent. There were only 5 papers that mentioned consent, and there were only, in fact, 3 papers in which consent was gained, and that consent was gained to take photos, and that would have come from the plastic surgeons who, in fact, always take photos, the, in fact, maxillofacial surgeons, etc. Now, just think about it. There's a whole lot of other issues behind the scenes here. You've got data being sent from a phone to a server down to a phone. It's on the first guy's phone, it's on the next guy's phone, and if it goes to a group chat, it's on everybody's phone, right? And we need to understand the transmission, the storage, and the patient should actually consent to this. So back home in South Africa, when we identified this, we said, well, a simple solution to this, because we've got no idea if the, in fact, referring doctor has actually taken consent. So I've said to them, take a photo of the signed consent form. That's your first photo. That takes care of that problem up to a point. Confidentiality, 8 papers mentioned it. Now, as you read through this, you'll see that it's not actually confidential. How do you identify a patient about whom the information is being shared? You've got to know something about that patient. You either have to know their name, the ward they're in, the bed they're in, and as soon as you have all of that information, it's easy to identify who the patient is. So there is no true confidentiality. Some people felt that because the data was only shared within the group, that meant it was confidential. And there was one paper that implied that if you'd got consent, that equaled confidentiality. I'm not quite sure how they got to that point. An interesting sentence. In fact, read through it. Basically, you don't have any directives in India, right? There are no set rules. But surely they will be coming in fact, time. And it isn't just in India that there aren't set guidelines. And the one thing that we have to learn within telemedicine as a whole, we need guidelines. We need standard operating procedures. Security, only 2 papers mention security. Password on the phone, or password on the phone and on the app. Where's the security? In fact, data is on the sender's phone, the data is on the receiver's phone, etc. One needs to be thinking about these things all the time. As in fact we know in the States, there was in fact, significant court case about attempting to get data off a phone. So, how secure is the data sent on WhatsApp? Well, in all the papers that I've mentioned, it was secure only if it went as a text message only from an Android phone to an Android phone. Why? Because end-to-end encryption was introduced for all messages, video, audio, text, group chats, etc., only from the 1st of April. Right? So it is secure now. It is so secure that in England, they want it banned. And here in India, there is a group who in fact also wanted banned. It went before your High Court or a Supreme Court in fact, July, and it was turned down at that point, but it may well come back by the sounds of it. How do you keep an infed record? There were doctors who said, it's a wonderful thing to use, but I can't get it into the patient's notes. There were other doctors who said, well, it's wonderful. I have all this information permanently on my phone, so I never lose a patient's notes. I don't lose, in fact, X-ray. But within WhatsApp, it's possible to email the chats and the images. So you can email it onto a secure server, and you will have a permanent hard copy. Right, so there are some upsides and some downsides. The upsides, there's far more information shared about each patient within the group. If it's a group, there's better communication, there's a flattening of hierarchy, and it's simple, effective, and cheap. There is no budget here. The doctors are doing it themselves. They're paying for it, and they're paying for it without complaining. The downsides, some people felt they were getting far too many messages. Some of the junior staff and nurses were overemphasizing the in fact, urgency and importance. As I said, you can't get it into a patient record. And the more you de-identify, the harder it is to identify, right? So that's a problem. So what have we learned, and learned from, in fact, India? Well, there's very little that's been published, right? It's seen over a wide spectrum of in fact, uses, mostly chat groups. We've seen that patients and family can be involved in it. There, in fact, haven't been any business plans. There haven't been any scale-up plans. It just happens. And so we have to learn how to do this, but we need to address the legal and the, in fact, ethical issues. I've touched upon confidentiality, the security of data, the storage of data, keeping of, in fact, records, consent, etc. All of these are issues that we need to get together about and solve the problem, because this is a simple solution. So it's needs-driven, at the doctor's own cost. The data transfer is secure. We need to address some of the issues that people who draft laws get concerned about. Is this the in fact, new face of telemedicine in the developing world? And might this not be the way that BRICS can actually function internationally over borders? Simple and cheap. So here is the end message. Thank you very much.